The talk you're about to hear is by Zen teacher Sensei Amala Wrightson.
It's the 20th of November 2018, and we're going to take up a story from The Hidden Lamp. This is an occasional series we're doing on the women masters who appear in our Pool of Radiance chart that we've started to do. And we've just been picking these out at random and talking about them every now and then as we'll be going through the last, it must be about 3 years now that we've been picking these out. And this one that we're going to look at today is called Ziyong's Earth. And I'll read the story and then we'll look a little bit about background material on this Master Ziyong. A monk asked Master Ziyong Chungru, 30 blows, are they the actions of a man or an enlightened being? Ziyong replied, just as long as the fellow isn't beaten to death. The monk said, when you speak, the congregation assembles like clouds. In the end, who is the great hero among women? Ziyong said, each and every person has the sky over their head. Each and every one has the earth under their feet. The monk gave a shout. Ziyong said, what is the point of recklessly shouting like that? The monk then bowed respectfully, and Ziyong said, the Dharma does not rise up alone. It can't emerge without reliance on the world. If I take up the challenge of speaking, I must surely borrow the light and the dark, the form and the emptiness of the mountains and hills and the great earth, the call of the magpies and the cries of crows. The water flows and the flowers blossom, brilliantly preaching without ceasing. In this way there is no restraint. So just a little bit of background material on this master Ziyong Chungru. And it's unusual in that we actually have quite a bit of information on her because there's this scholarly text that we're going to be reading from, which has done a lengthy study of her life, or was reporting on her life and her teaching. This book is called Eminent Nuns, Women Chan Masters of 17th Century China, and it has a whole chapter on Ziyong. And this is coming from some records that have miraculously survived of her life and her teachings. So there's a lot more here than we can cover. So I'll just be skipping around and picking out some of the interesting parts of it. And this Eminent Nuns book is by Beata Grant, who's a scholar and teacher. She teaches Chinese literature, religion, and women's and gender studies at Washington University in St. Louis. I have a couple of other of her books which are also really interesting and valuable. So just a little bit about her life. So she's belonged to Linji lineage. And this material comes from a biographical account that appears that she wrote herself in a collection of her works. She grew up in roughly the Beijing area, so she was from northern China. Her family moved there from the Liao River Valley of northeast China. And she was born around 1645 in what is today central Hubei province. Her father was in the service of one of the emperors, but then he withdrew from serving the emperor and turned down official positions and went into retirement, devoting himself to farming and study. But she does say about her father that he was upright and honest, a pure and good man of integrity and cultivation. And he was also a believer in Buddhism. So Ziyong seems to have had a little bit less trouble persuading her parents to let her become a nun than some others. Some of the other stories that are told in this book about other eminent nuns. She was, it seems, an only child. And she talks also about being determined from a very young age to leave the world and become a nun. She tells us that her tonsure master, that's the person who shaved her head, her first teacher, was a monk or nun by the name of Buren, and that after receiving tonsure, she spent many years visiting masters to deepen her understanding. And one of the places she visited was Mount Wutaishan, which is about 150 miles southwest of Beijing. And it's a whole bunch of mountains rather than just one. 5 Wutai, I think, means 5 mountains. And she mentions the grueling trip that she had to take to reach Wutai, which is not surprisingly, you have to go through a whole bunch of mountains. When my teacher, Rishi Colhead, went there around 1982, I think it was still a grueling trip. Think about it, something like a 20-hour jeep ride over potholed, winding, steep, narrow roads. But by the time we went in 2001, it was only a 6 or 7 hour trip in a bus, and the roads were mostly sealed, though still winding through the mountains. So it's a lot less inaccessible now than it was. And no doubt Master Ziyong would have been doing the journey on foot. Here's what she writes about her travel to Wutai. When I was in the region of Wu Tai, west of the Liao River, I experienced much toil and difficulty, but with a resolute spirit I faced the dangers and encountered tigers and wolves, thieves and bandits. But I was not frightened of fire or swords, natural disasters, or people out to harm me. I regarded everything with complete calm and tranquility. So get a picture of a pretty courageous person here. And people may know that Wu Tai, from as early as the 5th century, was known as the place of the home of the great bodhisattva of wisdom, Manjushri. And legend had it that if you were kind of devout enough, concentrated enough in your practice, when you visited Wu Tai Shan, you might be visited yourself by Manjushri. He might appear to you, and you never knew who it was, what form he would take. And so to be a pilgrim on Wu Tai Shan was to be in a high state of readiness and alertness in case one might encounter Manjushri on the road. It says here, it was also known as a place where one might be rewarded with sacred visions of Manjushri himself. And here it says, usually in the form of auspicious and wonderful lights. It seems that Ziyong Chengru was one of the many who claimed to have been granted such a vision. She records the experience in a short poem with a long title. On pilgrimage on Mount Wu Tai, I lost my way, but the Bodhisattva took compassion on me and manifested himself so as to show me the way. I wrote this as a record of this miracle in her verses as follows. Peaks and cliffs in folds of green known for their freshness. Mist and rain so obscure and deep I lost my way upward. Treading upon the dark blue hills, a red sun appeared, and the Dharma king burst forth from out of the void. She writes evocatively her experiences. And it was on Mount Wu Tai that she found the master who was most important to her. His name was Gulu Fan, the monk under whom she would, as she put it, die and then come back to life again. This is a way of talking about coming to awakening, dying to the small self and awakening to the great self. And this master was eventually to give her Dharma transmission. She talks a little bit in her record about her practice under Gulu Fan in her work on koans. That it seems her practice was what was known in China as vuoto cultivation, koan work. And she refers in a Dharma talk that's recorded to the great ball of doubt that was so emphasized by Da Hui and others. She says, 13 years ago, this mountain monastic embraced her huado, neglecting to sleep and forgetting to eat. She was like an idiot, like a cripple, like a person that was dead. 13 years later, she is like the bright sun on a beautiful day, shining on everything without exception. And it's not clear whether this 13 years was the time she spent under Gulu Fan, or whether it includes her other travels up to meeting him. But in any case, she eventually became one of Guru Phan's official Dharma successors. And then in 1691 was appointed as the abbess of Eternal Glory Chan Cloister, Yungqing Chanyuan in Beijing. And she served simultaneously several other convents in the imperial city, including Vast Benevolence Convent and the Eternal Life Chan Cloister. This latter one she wrote a poem about. The site of this Buddhist convent in the northern city is old, and its magnificently placed statues are grand and imposing. What is before and after in the transmission of Dharma? Just follow your karmic destiny, whether it is bitter or sweet. How wonderful not to engage in conceptions and deliberations, grasping that which seems to exist and yet seems not to be. I ask my nuns, wondering if there is anyone who understands. Are you going to be firm? Then you'll have to match swords. Picking out the core of this poem is probably the line where she says, just follow your karmic destiny, whether it is bitter or sweet. Not reading too much into that. We don't know where how old our karmic destiny is, where the different strands of it come from. But to just be engaging with our life as it is. Whatever comes before us is momentous in a sense. Just what needs to appear and just what we need to engage in. Apparently she worked very hard to restore a couple of these convents which were very run down. She was able to do this through her own hard work and by rallying the help of wealthy patrons. So she would have spent quite a bit of time, you would say in present terms, fundraising. It says in this text, in the accounts of Dharma encounters and talks in her Yulu is like record of her teachings, book of her teachings. In her Yulu collection, ascribed to this period of her life, there are numerous references to visiting groups of laywomen who sponsor vegetarian meals and request Dharma talks. And interesting thing is that at this time there were these religious lay associations which were very strong, and they'd existed for some time in China, and they were mostly made up of women who would support various teachers and go for Dharma talks and sponsor offerings of food. And there are also references to visits from members of the imperial family. It writes, such imperial patronage no doubt went a long way towards establishing the reputation of Ziyong's convent. Not to mention herself, she must have been quite impressive. And also in the records, she, besides receiving numerous visitors, She was involved in many requests for ceremonies such as funerals, ordinations. So her life, maybe not quite what we think of as going to be monastic life. We think it maybe is something, is withdrawing from the world and live a very quiet life. But in fact, it seems from this and from other accounts of other masters that it was an extremely full, busy life. One of many, many encounters. Here's a poem that she wrote on the occasion of her 49th birthday. How many glorious seasons have passed, 49 years of springtimes. Although in this world I have no companion, if I ask my mind, I find it is my own intimate. The smell of incense disperses the early dawn. The closed shutters keep away the dusty world. From today, having woken from a foolish dream, I am the just as it is idler person of the way. So even though she had this very busy life, she still could describe herself as an idler. This busy life of fundraising, conducting retreats, receiving guests. She also writes of this: labouring hard, I exerted myself, and never once was I willing to steal even a half day of leisure. Abandoning all attachments of body and soul, I resolutely dedicated my life to the attainment of sagehood and the transcendence of the world. Thanks to the power of the Buddha, I was able to move and persuade some Dharma patrons from among the wealthy gentry and district magistrates to help me to build a monastery. Once I had set up the basic framework, I was able to attract disciples and donors who, with their thoughts bent on posterity, helped me in the restoration and construction. Even before everything was in order, we held the 3-month summer silent meditation retreat. So in the midst, you could say, of their building project, they have one of these 3-month retreats, angos. Although I had not completed my work, in my heart I wanted to benefit and liberate the people of the world. It is because of this that I occasionally have had to make use of roundabout and cunning means, and it is for this reason that I was bestowed with the honorary name of Ship of Compassion and Universal Salvation. This was bestowed on her by an emperor. And of course, having such a name bestowed on one would increase the interest of the public in coming to the temple, be a mark of distinction. Even more visitors came and wanted to spend time in the monastery. Here's just an example of an exchange between her and a scholar coming to the temple. A first-degree graduate came from the south and entered the hall. He and the master looked at each other, and then the scholar said, having travelled all day to come and visit the Ship of Compassion, who would have guessed that this Ship of Compassion should turn out to be nothing but an old crone? The master, emitting an shaking roar, then asked, "What is this place? Tell me, is it male or is it female?" When the scholar could not reply, she said to him, "Come closer and I will tell you." Bad idea. When the scholar was in front of her, she grabbed him and said, "From the day you left Spirit Mountain, there is no place to be sought. From this day on, mother and son have met again." The scholar said, "I trust you completely," and prostrating himself, took refuge and requested the tonsure. So a dramatic turnaround. Besides all this work, building and renovating the temple that she was in charge of, she also clearly did a considerable amount of travel, both before and after she became an abbess, and we can imagine that this might have been quite a relief to all her administrative duties. Here's an example of a poem that she wrote about her times travelling. I still think about carrying my travel bundle in those days gone by, travelling the hills, frolicking in the waters, coming out in a cloud country, eyes open and eyebrows raised in astonishment. Everything is samadhi, and in this great earth there is nowhere that is not a wisdom hall. And we can relate this poem to the words in the story that we're going to look at tonight. But in this great earth, there is nowhere that is not a wisdom hall. In the last of her travels, it's not clear whether she ever made it back to Beijing, to her home temple, as she had promised her followers that she would. The writer Beata Grant says, it is also unclear when exactly she passed away, though we are told that it occurred on the 20th day of the 12th month. We don't know what year. The only account we have is that of an exchange between Ziyong Chungru and her disciple, Jing Xuan. It is a perfect Chan performance, but oddly poignant nevertheless, especially when we consider that Jing Xuan was one of her senior students, serving both as her personal attendant and as one of the nuns responsible for keeping the record of their teachers' Dharma talks and other activities. Her name appears in one of the fascicles of her discourse record collection. But here's the exchange. Jing was very anxious about the master's departure into nirvana. It's a way of saying the master's death. The master said, "From the beginning there has been neither birth nor death. So what nirvana will there be?" But Jing's grief did not abate. The master then gave a shout, and Jing silently went into a trance. The master then called her out of it and said, "At this moment, is there still any nirvana, or is there still not any of a nirvana?" Jing said, "Your disciple from the beginning has experienced neither birth nor death, so what nirvana can there be?" The master then said, "Since there is no birth or death, how can there be a nirvana?" Jing did not know what to say. The master said, "This is what it is like before the dream." Jing replied, "What is it like after the dream?" The master said, "When you are in a dream, you still speak the language of dreams." So it seems, as is often the case with these masters, that they're teaching right up to the moment of their passing. Even their death becomes a means to teach and to help the student deepen their questioning about birth and death and liberation. And then finally, when she did die, she produced one last verse, which is as follows: "Summoning the ordinary, who does not know it? All of a sudden I have grasped the sword and split open the dying words of the immortals. Fathers are never able to transmit it to their sons. And now back to our story. We'll just have a look at it bit by bit here. A monk asked Master Ziyong Chungru, 30 blows, are they the actions of a man or an enlightened being? Ziyong replies, just as long as the fellow isn't beaten to death. So 30 blows, people who are familiar with the koans will probably recognize this as one of the fairly vigorous, you could even say macho, teaching methods of the Rinzai school, the Linji school, to whether the masters actually give the student 30 blows or they threaten to. It's quite a common thing in certain branches of the Linji school of Chan. So the monk comes and asks about these 30 blows, and particularly who is giving them. Are they the actions of a man or an enlightened being? Now, what does he mean here by man? Is he talking about an ordinary being, a non-enlightened being, or is he talking about a man in contrast to a woman? Is he? And often these questions, so they're sort of indirect. What they're really asking is who are you? If you give 30 blows, and she was known to have a pretty vigorous style of teaching at certain points, if you are giving 30 blows, do you presume to be a man, or do you presume to be an enlightened one as a woman? How dare you? And her response is a great one, because it does not. He doesn't get a rise out of her. He doesn't get a reaction from her. His sort of somewhat impertinent question. She says, just as long as the fellow isn't beaten to death. You could see her as contrasting here live blows with dead blows. Blows given at the right moment, in the right situation, could give us life, to help us wake up. That's the way Master Linji would use the physical contact. It was to bring the student into the present moment, right to here, this moment. That's great when used skillfully, but they could just become dead blows, and this was a problem right from the early times of the Zen school, that a master would use this as a teaching method, and then others would imitate that master, and it was just be an imitation rather than a living response to a student's need. And in that case, the live blows became dead blows. It's why she says, just as long as the fellow isn't beaten to death. The point of the blows is not to beat somebody to death, but to beat them into life. So in a way, Master Cheng is answering the question about who she is when she gives 30 blows. Then the monk asked, when you speak, the congregation assembles like clouds. In the end, who is the great hero among women? In this second questions, there's a little bit more of his veiled discrimination against her being female that comes out in this. It's a little bit more obvious here. When you speak, the congregation assembles like clouds. Seems to be perhaps a compliment. He's tried to get her with a challenging question, and now he's at first seems to be complimenting her because if the congregation assembles like clouds, that's to accumulate, to be many people coming to listen to her speak. And in the end, who is the great hero among women? And this involves a little bit, it needs to be unpacked a little bit. So he seems to be saying, well, who's this great teacher? Who is it that's the great hero among women? Again, asking, who are you? What are you? And this line takes a little bit of unpacking because what this great hero has got a long history in Chan school, and it's quite a gender biased, you could say, term. In Chinese, it's Chang Fu, and sometimes this Chang Fu is actually translated as a manly man. Or another slightly less comic translation is a gentleman hero. So this monk is saying, are you a gentleman hero among women? And in this we see how much gender bias there was in Chan circles. The masters were seen as being heroes, but it was in very kind of macho terms. Here's what Grace Shireson writes about this in her book Zen Women, Beyond Tea Ladies, Iron Maidens and Macho Masters. She writes, what we learn from classical Zen literature most emphatically is that all Zen masters are heroic. Leverings is another scholar, has noted this use of male-gendered language to describe a Zen master's essence. On the one hand, all beings, without exception, are capable of enlightenment. On the other hand, any being who attains the way is Chang Fu, or a manly man. The heroism of Zen masters is both the source of their determination to practice and the fruit of their spiritual accomplishment. Zen masters predominantly come in one flavour, the heroic manly men. What does this say about the female Zen master? And she goes on to talk about how in the classical literature of Zen, the stuff that became the kind of the canon or the received literature, the koan collections that became part of the curriculum that is taught, the women who appear fit into that mould. They're the ones who manage to kind of act like manly men, and they're the ones who are, there are very few of them, but they're the ones who are whose records got into the official stories, but they're very, very much kind of one-dimensional. We don't know much about their struggles or their lives, and their stories are stories that sort of fit into that macho mold. And it's the stories from outside of that tradition where we learn more about the women and their lives and their struggles as distinct from what the men experienced. So we could see this monk as saying, well, how come you possibly claim to be a manly man since you're a woman? But again, this jab, this poke, doesn't upset Master Ziyong, and she comes back with what is a beautiful statement. Each and every person has the sky over their head. Each and every one has the earth under their feet. It reminds me a little bit of a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, "People usually consider walking on water or in thin air a miracle, but I think the real miracle is not to walk either on water or in thin air, but to walk on earth. Every day we're engaged in a miracle which we don't even recognize. A blue sky, white clouds, green leaves, the black, curious eyes of a child, our own two eyes, all is a miracle." So the Master Changru is really acknowledging this miracle that is right in front of our eyes. You could also say that she's pointing to, when she says each and every person, she's pointing to the fact that it really is everybody who is equally endowed. It doesn't have anything to do with being a man or a woman. Beginners, experienced practitioners, healthy people, sick people, criminals and the law-abiding, Buddhist and non-Buddhist. Each and every one is endowed with the sky above and the earth below. In response to this statement, the monk gives a shout. Now, a shout, ha! was another classical response, especially again in the Linji school. If you read lots of stories of the ancient masters, there often be this word cuts. We might, in English, we might say bah. So why did this monk shout in this way? And again, this shout, like the 30 blows, it was easy for it to turn from being a response that's full of life, full of presence, and it did turn often into being a kind of a Zen cliche. But my guess is here that the monk's purpose was he was giving a response to Ziyong's statement about each and every person having the sky over their head and the earth under their feet. How adequate a response we could debate, but a response to that miracle of being alive. And Ziyong chides him. She says, what is the point of recklessly shouting like that? And you can imagine these masters must have got pretty sick of students coming and shouting and strutting around. Perhaps she saw in this monk this kind of a bit of a Zen stink in his shout. Or maybe it was an authentic demonstration of his response, and she was testing him. Again, she was pulling the rug out from under him. And that's the interesting thing about the monk's next response after she says this. She isn't impressed by this shout, but says, what's the point? What's the point of shouting like that? And we can see in this, she's saying, well, if everyone has the sky over their head and the earth under their feet, why do we have to make a fuss about it? Why do we have to posture? And it's just how things are. Everybody has the same inheritance. And in response to this, the monk is now silent, and he simply bows. And just in that silent bow, there's a great deal. It's like now suddenly he's not testing her, he's not poking her and trying to get a rise. He's just open. He's receptive now. He's no longer saying you're some kind of upstart female, trying to be a manly man. All of those sorts of categories now have dropped. He's dropped them. And sensing that openness and that receptivity, now Master Ziyong is more forthcoming. She says, the Dharma does not rise up alone. It can't emerge without reliance on the world. If I take up the challenge of speaking, I must surely borrow the light and the dark, the form and the emptiness of the mountains and hills and the great earth, the call of the magpies and the cries of the crows. The water flows and the flowers blossom, brilliantly preaching without ceasing. In this way there is no restraint. So right after really steering this monk in the direction of dropping categories, male and female, black and white, and so forth, now she's actually affirming the world of forms, the world of difference, and saying the Dharma completely relies on the things of the world. In another translation of this, it says that the Dharma can't emerge without reliance on the environment. She ends by saying, the water flows and the flowers blossom, brilliantly preaching without ceasing. She's perhaps aligning herself with this teaching of mountains and rivers and the great earth, in the sense of her own words flowing like the water. Her words and actions can be just natural and selfless as the teachings of flowers and magpies and crows. But at the same time, she's also saying that these very things of the world inform her teaching. Even more than that, she's saying that they inform her very being. In November, in Rochester, in Arnold Park, where the Zen Centre is, in the evenings, around dusk, great flocks of crows come and roost in the trees in the street, They settle down in trees actually all over the city. And every time I hear their harsh cries, caw, 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 and just probably scores, if not more, of these crows in the trees, it takes me right back to the first time that I visited the centre, which was in November in 1986, and they evoke in me all the feelings I went through at that first visit to the centre. Wonder at the Dharma and the community there, and this strong feeling of having finally found the way that I needed to follow. And the crows bring this forth from me, the sound of their cawing. It's really as if time and space expand in my hearing those cries. There's a line we chant in Affirming Faith and Mind: 1 instant is 10,000 years. They at once point to something very specific in time and space, and at the same time expand time and space infinitely. You really can take to heart Master Ziyong's words here. The Dharma does not rise up alone. It can't emerge without reliance on the world. One of the ways we can understand this, and it can support us, this statement, now in our time, the 21st century, is in terms of our work for the environment, that it's not something peripheral, it's right at the center of our practice. Every time a species is lost or we pollute another river, that world that we rely on is impoverished. Humanity is impoverished, diminished. So this work, the work that we do on caring for our world is really central. It's we can see this work as having two prongs, two ways forward. In our zazen, in our sitting, we're sitting in order to reconnect with this world, that to overcome our separation from it and from the delusion, the basic delusion in our minds that separates me in here and it out there. So there's that work, and then there's the work that sitting demands of us, that we get up off the mat and engage in the world with all its beauties and its shadows. Well, our time is up. We'll stop here and recite the 4 vows. All beings without number, I vow to liberate endless blind passions I vow to uproot. Dharma gates beyond measure I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha I vow to attain. All beings without number I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions I vow to uproot. Dharma gates beyond measure I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha I vow to attain. All beings without number I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions I vow to uproot. Dharma gates beyond measure I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha I vow to attain.
The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Centre, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.